Story number 1, The Blade in the Dark. You're in a darkened movie theater, the screen flickering with shadows. Your date, a charming stranger from a dating app, leans close, his breath warm against your ear. Then you feel it, a cold, sharp pressure against your side, and his voice, low and menacing, orders you to stay silent. His name was Sean, and I met him on Tinder. Your heart stops. Is this a joke, or are you seconds from disaster? I won't say it was love at first sight. The film drones on, but all you can think about is the blade, its edge, a whisper of danger. It took a bit of cajoling from him to get me to agree to a date. Every laugh from the audience feels like a taunt, every shadow a threat. He wasn't really my type. He's smiling, but his eyes are wrong, and you're trapped in the back row with nowhere to run. Kind of looked like he loved himself. You weren't sold on Sean at first. Too polished, too confident, a tall and buff guy, but his wit, his nerdy charm, won you over. I'm usually into slightly pudgier guys who, well, I'm sure you don't care about that, but trust me, fellas, he knew your passions, Marvel, horror, the thrill of opening night. Women who like normal guys are out there. He suggested a movie, a safe first date. And Sean won me over with a sense of humor, his smooth talking and his absolute geekery. You agreed, meeting him at a neutral spot, cautious but hopeful. I'm a big Marvel fan. Or, well, I was back then anyway. The drive to the theater was easy. His banter light and fun. I was also really big into horror, especially the Conjuring universe. He matched your energy, geeking out over films, though he was skeptical about the movie you'd chosen. So Sean eventually won me over by inviting me to go with him to see The Nun. You laughed it off, expecting a cheesy horror flick. Hey, the movies are a pretty easy place for a first date. He promised to make it unforgettable, a spark of mischief in his voice. If it's going badly, you can just sort of shift away in your seat and ignore the other person for the duration of the film. You thought he meant flirting, maybe a stolen kiss. He picked me up at a nearby Starbucks. You were wrong. His plan was darker, and you're about to find out how much. Don't give random Tinder dates your address, people. He was charming in person, a nerd with a quick laugh, and we drove to the theater. You relaxed, sharing popcorn, settling into the back row, and honestly, he was great. The theater was nearly empty, the perfect spot for a quiet date. Really charming, fun, and generally a good time. But his comments grew sharper, mocking the film's scares. He knew his movies, too. You tried to enjoy it, ignoring his jabs. A nerd in a sort of cute way, which is basically just to say that he's a nerd. Then he tells you to look down, and your world shatters. Now, the one problem was he was fairly pessimistic about the prospects for The Nun. He nudges you, his tone shifting. I'll give him this. You glance, and there it is, a massive knife, its tip pressed into your side. He ended up being right. Your breath catches, fear flooding you. And man, that movie sucked. He whispers, calm and cold. Don't move, or it goes in. And let's not even mention the sequel. But this isn't about that. You freeze, the movie a blur, his voice a chain. Sean was certain that the first movie was going to suck, even though we were going on opening night, and he was promising me that he had something in mind that would make the experience way more memorable. You sit trembling as he jokes about the film, acting like nothing's wrong. Quote unquote. The blade's pressure is constant, a silent threat. Well, here we go. You nod at his comments, terrified to disagree. I was thinking he's going to make sure that we get seats in the back row, and I'm going to be in for an evening of dodging make-out attempts and groping hands. The minutes crawl, each one a lifetime. Still, I wasn't too dissuaded by the former at least. You pray for the credits, for escape, but dread what comes next. If only that's what Sean had planned. Though he's too calm, too steady, and it's chilling. We grabbed our tickets and some popcorn and even a hot dog. He's not letting you go, and you're not sure you'll leave this theater alive. Sean was against the idea of buying a drink, though you try to think, to plan, but fear paralyzes you. According to him, needing to leave the theater to use the bathroom ruined any movie. Calling out would be suicide. He's too close, too ready. I mean, I guess I could buy that. The elderly couple down the row is oblivious. The screen's glow, mocking your terror. I did miss a key scene in The Dark Knight, thanks to a bathroom break, but it is a bit psychotic with salty popcorn. You stifle sobs, playing along, waiting for a chance. And sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row. The film ends, the lights rise, and you see it. The knife is fake, a prop from a horror movie. We'd arrived very early for the showing, and it was one of those small-town theaters where you just kind of chose whatever seats were available. Relief crashes into rage. He led us down the aisle of the back row until we were basically in the middle, looking down at the screen. He grins, proud, thinking he's thrilled you. It was a prime spot in fairness, and I was fine with the seating arrangement. You explode, hurling popcorn, storming out. We sat there making small talk, laughing at the ads, and then watching the trailers quietly like good moviegoers should. You reporting, but the law fails you. Just a fine, a restraining order. Then the lights dimmed. You're shaken. The memory of that blade a scar? Sean finished his hot dog, and he positioned the popcorn between us, and our hands brushed a couple of times as we shared the salty goodness, and I even felt a bit of a spark there. You avoid theaters now. The dark too heavy with a shadow. The movie started off not too bad. You told friends, your family, but their shock fades while yours lingers. I was kind of enjoying it, honestly. You check dating apps with caution. Every profile a potential threat. Tysa Fariga can win me over it very easily. You search online, hoping to understand him. Nothing. Just a void where answers should be. But Sean, however, was not enjoying it. You moved to a new city, craving distance. He kept nudging me, making whispered comments about how crappy it was and how it could use some extra scares. Your new apartment is bright, secure, but you sleep lightly. I mostly just ignored him because, honestly, I was enjoying it, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. You join a horror fan group, seeking solace, but avoid movie nights. And then he told me to look down. Others share stories, pranks gone wrong, fares crossing lines. At the same time, I felt something prodding into my side. One woman describes a date pulling a fake gun, thinking it was funny. Sean was sitting on my left, and other than an elderly couple at the end of the row on the right, we had the whole line to ourselves. The echoes unsettle you further. I looked down. You contact the theater asking about Sean. He's a ghost. No record, no return visits. Sean was holding the biggest hunting knife I had ever seen, and the tip of it was very slightly pressed into my side. You push for updates on the case, but it's closed, forgotten. I remember his words like it was yesterday. You start a blog, sharing your story, warning others, move or call for help, or do anything, and the blade goes in. Comments pour in, sympathy, outrage, similar tales. He said, just keep watching the movie. You feel less alone, but no safer. And so we did. The fear reshapes you. And throughout, he kept making goofy remarks and joking comments as if he didn't have a huge knife held against me. You take self-defense classes, carry pepper spray now, and I was absolutely trembling, terrified, and speechless, with fear almost. You avoid small towns, their theaters too intimate, too dark at times. I had to stifle back sobs as I replied to his inane jibes at the movie. You keep your circle tight, trusting few. At this point, I had no idea if he'd lose his mind in anger if I disagreed with him calling the movie garbage or something. You check your locks, your windows, every night. I mean, it kind of was. And it got worse as it went on. But obviously, I didn't really care at that point. You find a therapist working through the trauma. And at that point, I was just begging for it to be over. She helps. But the blade's memory lingers, cold and sharp. Scenarios were running through my head. You write more, your blog growing, a beacon for others. What would happen when the credits rolled? You connect with survivors, their stories mirroring yours. Would he expect us to just walk out like nothing had happened? One man shares a tale of a date wielding a prop axe, grinning like Sean. Would I be getting a blade to the gut? The pattern chills you, fans twisting passion into terror. I understood now why he'd forbidden us from getting a soda. You track down the props seller online, a specialty shop. Not only could it have required me to get up, but it would have improved the chances of me actually pissing myself in fear. They sold dozens. No way to trace Sean. I genuinely cannot express to you the terror of sitting there for 90 minutes with a blade gently pushing into the soft flesh of my stomach. You keep digging, but he's gone. A shadow in your past. I wanted to do something. You install cameras, sleep with a light on. I knew if I called out for help, he'd be able to gut me before I could receive so much as a look of concern from fellow moviegoers. The fear is a companion, but you're stronger now. And then, thank God, the movie was over. Years later, you're different, cautious, but not broken. We sat there for a moment, and the credits were rolling and the knife was still pressing into me. You've reclaimed horror? Watching at home? Safe? The theater lights went up, and that's when I saw it. You speak at fan events, warning about boundaries, about obsession. It was a literal prop knife. Your blog is a community, a shield for others. Now, before you think I'm some idiot, it was a professional level movie prop. You don't date online anymore, but you're open to love someday. I'll be honest, you've faced the dark, and you're still here. He must have paid top dollar for it, but sometimes, in the quiet, you feel it, that pressure, that blade, and you check the shadows, just to be sure. And I could only tell because in the light, I could see the official Rob Zombie's Halloween movie, Brandon, on the handle. Story number 2, The Silent Neighbor. The theater was a sea of shadows. The screen's glow, the only light in the dark. I was studying a film school freshman, alone in a packed showing of The Silence of the Lambs. The man next to me was a ghost in a heavy coat, his presence heavy, his breath absent. I didn't know it then, but I was sitting beside death itself. This is the story of the corpse who shared my movie, and the questions that still haunt me. The air was thick, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. I squeezed into my seat, the theater alive with whispers and popcorn crunches. My neighbor's coat brushed my arm, its stale odor clinging to the air. I ignored it, focusing on the screen, but his stillness unnerved me. Every nudge, every vibration felt wrong, like the weight of something final. I was too caught up in the film to realize he wasn't watching. It was a busy show, and the movie was The Silence of the Lambs. My friend bailed last minute, so I just decided to go by myself. The theater was packed. The commercials had started as I made my way down the aisle and squeezed along the row to my seat. I brushed past people, muttering apologies. I apologized for bumping into him. My neighbor wore a very thick old coat and what I actually recognized to be a trilby. The movie gripped me, its tension sinking into my bones. Silence of the Lambs starts off as a very tense movie and only gets more tense from there. I felt his shoulder against mine, heavy, unmoving. Occasionally, I felt my theater neighbor's shoulder brush against mine. I nudged him back. Thinking he was asleep, I was sure that I could feel the occasional vibration of a snore at least. The film's horror drowned out my unease. My snack's a distraction. I ate my popcorn and nachos, finished my soda. I stayed through the credits, waiting for the crowd to thin. I decided to just wait it out. The lights rose, revealing the truth. The guy next to me was still there. I tapped him, expecting a groggy response. I gave him a tap on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, buddy, you okay?" He slumped over, lifeless, his hat tumbling to the floor. The man, or should I say his body, slumped over to the left and his hat fell off. In the dim light, I saw it stone cold dead. This dude was dead. D-E-A-D. Absolutely stone cold dead. I had been sitting beside a corpse the entire film. I'd clearly been sitting next to a corpse for the entire showing of that movie. The cops explained the sounds, gas escaping a bloated body. When I first nudged him, I'd likely just caused some gas to escape his body. His death wasn't suspicious. They said likely an overdose. The cause of death wasn't suspicious, so I just kind of replied with natural causes. But it wasn't natural. He'd possibly been sitting there for 3 showings of that damn movie. Why choose The Silence of the Lambs to die? The final thing that bothers me is, why did he choose The Silence of the Lambs as the final thing he ever saw? The theater's neglect haunted me. How had no one noticed? It always bothered me how he wasn't discovered by a theater employee in between the showings. He'd slipped away, alone, in a crowd, his silence louder than the film. Maybe he was simply haunted by his own lambs, that he needed to silence, that he... Story number 3. The scream in the theater. The theater was dark, the screen flickering with blood and shadows. My girlfriend, Jennifer, clung to my arm, her breath quickening as the movie's tension built. But the real horror wasn't on the screen. It was in the seats ahead, where a man's voice erupted sharp and angry, shattering the silence like glass. I froze, popcorn spilling from my hand. The voice wasn't cheering or laughing. It was furious, aimed at the characters as if they could hear him. Jennifer's nails dug into my sleeve. Her eyes beat not at the movie, but at the figure a few rows down. His silhouette hulking against the screen's glow. The theater was nearly empty. Just a handful of us scattered across the seats. This guy, whoever he was, didn't care. His shouts grew louder, ranting about horror, about rules, about disrespect. Each word was a spark, and I could feel the air shift, like a storm was brewing in the dark. Another voice cut through, closer, sharper, a second man, smaller, leaner, telling the first to shut up. The argument flared, their words biting, and I knew it wouldn't stop there. Jennifer whispered my name, her voice trembling, but I couldn't look away. Something was about to break, and we were all trapped in its path. This wasn't supposed to happen. A movie date was simple: popcorn, soda, a chance to steal kisses in the dark. But now, the theater felt alive. Its shadows too deep, its quiet too fragile. The screen played on, but the real story was unfolding in the aisles, and it was uglier than anything Hollywood could dream up. We were first-year college students. Jennifer and I had been dating for a few months, young and reckless, always looking for an excuse to be close. And I'd learned some time ago that horror movies were a great way to get a bit of extra affection. The movie had been showing for a few weeks at this point, so it wasn't a very busy showing. Perfect for a date night with a girl like Jennifer. The theater was old, its seats creaky, the air smelling of stale popcorn and faded velvet. We got some popcorn, we got some soda, tickets were clipped and seats were taken. We settled in, her head on my shoulder, the screen lighting up with Scream's opening scene. Trailers were watched as they are, and Drew Barrymore got grilled on her favorite scary movie. The film's meta humor was sharp, poking fun at horror tropes, but we weren't paying close attention. I was making out with my girl at the time and failing to pay too much attention to the bits where people weren't getting murdered. Jennifer's hands were warm, her laughter soft against my ear. But then, the mood shifted. The person who was a few rows ahead of ours really didn't agree with something Randy said about the rules of horror movies. His voice boomed, raw and indignant, railing against the screen, so much so, in fact, that he yelled out at his disagreement at the screen. Now, you got to remember, this was back in the 90s, and back then, keeping your damn mouth shut was normal etiquette in movie theaters. Outside of very specific, obviously intended moments, you didn't just yell at movies, and you certainly don't provide angry, nerdy commentary to nobody in particular because you disagreed with the writer. But this guy, let's call him Mitchell, didn't care. He started yelling and hooting about the integrity of the horror genre. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just annoying, it was unhinged. Jennifer pulled back, her eyes darting to the bed, his arms flailing in the dim light. The theater felt smaller, the exits too far. I whispered to her to stay calm, but my own pulse was racing, unsure what this guy might do next. That's when the guy next to him started screaming, too. Like I said, it was an empty movie theater. These two guys had been sitting next to each other, so I assumed they were together. But later, found out that no, they were strangers who decided they absolutely had to stick to their assigned seats instead of sitting anywhere they wanted in the theater. The second man, call him Steve, wasn't yelling at the movie. Steve was screaming at Mitchell for screaming at the movie. I don't remember the exact exchange, but I remember it well enough that I can make parts of it up for impact. Stuff like, "Dude, it's just a movie. Sit the F down and shut the F up." Steve yelled, "Now." I should note at this point Mitchell was still sitting down. He was just kind of flailing his fists around and being very animated. "Are you listening to this?" Mitchell yelled back at Steve, gesturing to the screen and then to Steve and then to the mostly empty movie theater. Jennifer had grabbed my arm and was kind of cowering down in her seat, hoping that we wouldn't get noticed by these weirdos. "I'm trying to listen to the movie," Steve said, and this seemed to calm Mitchell down for a few minutes. But the peace didn't last. Then something else, and scream set him off. This time, though, Mitchell really did stand up and started yelling at the screen like the characters could fully hear him and react to him. He was actually genuinely offended at some opinion that one of the characters had about horror movies. He knew that there was a writer speaking through the characters, and he knew Wes Craven had directed the movie. So a lot of his eye was directed at poor old Wes. Mitchell was screeching about the hypocrisy on display. His words were a jumble, half-coherent rants about horror's legacy, about disrespect. I don't think it even made sense with what the movie was actually saying. He just decided that Scream was taking pot shots as beloved horror genre, and nothing anyone could say or do was going to change his mind. I leaned toward Jennifer, whispering, "This guy's nuts." And I whispered that to Jennifer. "Well, look," she whispered back. The air crackled with tension. Mitchell's voice was a siren, drawing every eye in the theater. Steve stood now, his frame small but defiant, his voice cutting through the rant. I gripped the armrest, knowing this was about to get worse, much worse. Mitchell was a big guy. From a few rows back anyway, he appeared to be around 6 feet to nearly 300 pounds of fat and muscle. And then Steve stood up and squared up to him. Now, Steve was not a tall, muscular powerhouse at all. He was 5'6", if that, and he was one of those thin, pasty dudes you see a lot of on YouTube these days, with long hair and white t-shirts. But Steve didn't back down. But good God, Steve squared up to Mitchell like he was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He had the confidence of a man who knew unquestionably that he could kick this other guy's ass. And if it came to it, he would. So Steve reaches out and pokes Mitchell in the chest and says something like, "Just shut the F up and sit down, buddy. Do us all a favor. Some of us are trying to watch the movie." Now, me and Jennifer, we're paying attention now. I grab a handful of popcorn. Jennifer whispers to me, asking to take bets on what's going to happen next. And I tell her, I think Mitchell is going to back down. But I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. Instead, this Mitchell guy let out what I guess was intended to be a roar. But his voice cracked mid-growl. So it was kinda like. And then he just grabbed Steve's outreached finger and with an actual audible crack snaps his finger backwards. We're all just staring at this completely shell-shocked. Steve takes a few steps back into the aisle, and he's staring at his finger bent backwards and then back up at Mitchell. Even in the dark of the theater, I see a look pass over Steve's face that even to this day makes my stomach sink. It was the look of a man who realized that he just made a very big mistake. You see, that confident, "I got this guy" I'd imagined Steve has in that moment, he obviously didn't exist. I guess he thought Mitchell would have fallen for it and backed down, but not so much, but my heart pounded. The movie forgotten. Steve's face was pale, his finger twisted unnaturally, and Mitchell loomed over him, his bulk filling the aisle. Jennifer's hand tightened on mine, her breath shallow. This wasn't a fight. It was a massacre waiting to happen, and we were all witnesses. Remember how I'd also assumed Mitchell was an unfit kind of slob? Who knows if I was right about that? But this guy had heft, and he threw himself at Steve. Just full-on charged into him in the aisle like a goddamn bull, slammed Steve straight into the floor so hard that we actually heard another crack. And then Mitchell was pounding, punching, pummeling him. His fat fists were flying. Blood was literally coming from Steve's mouth as Mitchell was just wailing on him, continuing to shriek and yell about the movie, about horror, about disrespect, all sorts of incoherent crap that made him sound like the obvious violent nut job that he clearly was. Of course, being a hot-blooded 18-year-old male, I wasn't just going to sit there and watch this guy get destroyed just for telling Mitchell to shut up. And despite Jennifer begging me not to get involved, I started to make my way down the aisle in the semi-darkness. I moved slowly, my heart in my throat, hoping someone else would step in. Now, again, I was taking my time a little, hoping another savior might show up in the meantime. And thankfully, she did. Out of nowhere, vaulting over chairs like some Olympian, this woman came sprinting out of left field, shocking all of us, except Mitchell. Of course, who was too busy beating on Steve to notice her. The woman, I'm just going to call her Venus, took advantage of Mitchell's obliviousness. A few feet away, I saw her stop. Then she took a running kick, knocking Mitchell clear off of Steve and sending him rolling down the aisle a few feet, barely even pausing to leap over Steve. Venus then whipped something from her belt. I heard the sound of a spray can, and Mitchell's screams changed dramatically. Turns out, our savior was an off-duty homicide detective at the theater with her husband to enjoy a romantic date night together. Mitchell got a face full of mace, a boot's worth of broken ribs, and a handcuffing in the form of plastic ties that Venus kept on her person while off-duty just in case situations like this arose. Relief flooded me, but the scene was chaos. Mitchell writhed on the floor, his screams muffled by pain, while Venus stood over him, calm and commanding. Steve groaned, bloodied but alive, and the theater lights flickered on, exposing the carnage. Reality had outdone the movie, and we were all part of it. She later joked that she never expected to actually have to perform an off-duty arrest. Steve was fine, except for a few broken teeth. The paramedics arrived quickly, tending to Steve while Venus kept Mitchell restrained, her voice steady as she spoke to the theater staff. And as for what happened after to Mitchell, Steve, and this Venus character, I can only guess. We missed the end of the movie, obviously, and we were all offered refunds and comp tickets for any showing or movie of our choice. Someone tells me they didn't extend this offer to Mitchell, though. Now, I scored points with Jennifer for at least intending to be a hero. But I'll leave that up to you to decide how that manifested. We left the theater shaken, the night's romance replaced by adrenaline and shock. Jennifer and I ultimately didn't stay together, but we are still Facebook friends, and she seems to be doing good to this day. Though I've still never watched the second half of Scream, I decided to leave the rest of the movie up to my imagination, because sometimes fiction can never compete with the insanity that is reality. The aftermath was surreal. We gave statements to the police, our words tumbling out in a rush, the theater's lobby too bright after the darkness. Venus was a hero, her husband beaming with pride as she recounted the arrest with a wry smile. Steve was taken to the hospital, his face swollen but his spirit intact, muttering about pressing charges. Mitchell was hauled away, still ranting, his voice fading as the squad car doors closed. Jennifer and I didn't talk much on the drive home. The night had started with laughter, with stolen kisses, but it ended with a weight we couldn't shake. We tried to go back to normal, more dates, more movies, but the theater incident lingered, a crack in our carefree bubble. We drifted apart by summer, our breakup amicable but inevitable. She's married now, with kids, her Facebook posts full of smiles. I'm happy for her, but I wonder if she ever thinks about that night, about the screams that weren't from the screen. I avoided horror movies for a while, sticking to comedies, to anything that didn't remind me of Mitchell's rage or Steve's blood. But curiosity eventually pulled me back. I watched Scream years later, alone in my apartment, pausing at the video store scene where Randy lays out the rules. I could almost hear Mitchell's voice, his fury echoing through time. The movie was good, sharp, but it paled against the memory of that night. When fiction bled into reality, I looked up the incident once, hoping for closure. Local news archives mentioned a fight at a theater, an arrest, but the details were sparse. No names, no follow-up. I like to think Venus is still out there, saving the day, her mace at the ready. Steve, I hope, healed, maybe even laughed about it later. Mitchell, I don't know. Part of me hopes he got help, that his anger was a moment, not a life. But another part doesn't care. As long as he's far from any theater I'm in. The old theater closed a few years back, replaced by a strip mall. I drove by once, the lot empty, the marquee gone. It felt strange, like a dream I couldn't quite recall. But the memory of that night, it is vivid, sharper than any movie. It taught me something about people, about how thin the line is between order and chaos. And it taught me to trust my instincts, to move when trouble stirs, even if it's just a voice in the dark. Story number 4, The Creature in the Aisles. I worked as a cleaner at a local, reasonably large theater in my city. The job was a grind, a nightly battle against the chaos left by theatergoers who treated the place like a landfill, popcorn scattered like shrapnel, soda pooling in sticky lakes, candy wrappers fluttering like ghosts. Every shift was a war against filth. Theatergoers were just filthy animals. I'd seen it all. Melted chocolate smeared on seats, half-eaten hot dogs squashed into cup holders, even a bologna sandwich glued to a chair. The theater was a cathedral of human neglect, its aisles a testament to carelessness. Sometimes it would be things that we didn't even sell, but it wasn't the mess that scared me. It was what hid in the shadows of that half-lit auditorium. The nights were long, The theater a maze of echoes. My mama raised me right and good and taught me to clean up after my own damn self. Growing up poor, every bite of food was precious, every scrap sacred. We also grew up poor, and me and my mother and younger brother Tyrell, if I bought a hot dog, then I was damn well going to eat that hot dog, not just squash it into a cup holder. So the waste I cleaned up felt personal, a betrayal of the lessons carved into me, but the job paid, and I was good at it. Armed with my trash bag, grabby claw, and bucket of industrial cleaner, yet some nights the theater felt alive, its darkness holding secrets far worse than spilled soda. One night, the air turned heavy with dread. I was working very late. The auditorium was empty, the last patrons gone, leaving me alone in the gloom. After a midnight showing, they just kind of kept the lights dim. The theater's owners were too cheap to light the place properly for a cleaner, so I worked under a sickly half-glow. It was eerie, but I liked it at first. The quiet, the solitude, the way the shadows danced across the seats. I was cool with it. I'd caught the tail end of the movie, and it gave me the spook. So I was kind of enjoying the atmosphere of a half-lit movie theater as I went about cleaning up. But then I saw it. A flicker of movement, too fast, too wrong, skittering across the aisles. It wasn't my imagination. Movement caught my eye. Something sort of skittering across the aisle near the front from one row to the other. I say this like a spider, but it was the size of a human being, like someone had rapidly crawled from one side of row C to the other. My heart lurched, a cold wave crashing through me. Anyone there?" I called out, praying to the Lord above that there wouldn't be a reply. Silence answered. But it wasn't empty. It was heavy, watchful. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. But my hands trembled as I gripped my grabby claw. I just went back to cleaning. Then it came again, undeniable. From aisle A, the theater was no longer mine. Rustling from near aisle E, the sound of popcorn crunching underfoot. I'd know that sound anywhere. It was sharp, deliberate, the sound of something moving with purpose. I thought I had no idea who was left in that theater that late at night. For all I knew, it was just me and our old-ass manager. But managers didn't crawl, didn't skulk in the dark. I heard a sound from across the theater. It was hard to tell in the gloom, but it looked like someone had thrown a soda cup across the room. The cup arced through the air, landing with a hollow clatter. A taunt from the shadows. A shadow darted over the seats near the front of the screen. More crunching sounds, and then suddenly silence. The silence was worse. A predator holding its breath. I was prey, and I knew it. I began to creep slowly as I could toward the exit door. Every step was a gamble. The dim lights casting long, twisted shadows across the aisles. I thought I had screwed myself when my shoe got stuck on some sticky soda spill, and I grabbed the sheet, shaking it somewhat. The sound echoed, a betrayal in the quiet. There was silence, and I made it almost to the exit. My hand was inches from the door, freedom so close I could taste it. Then I heard more skittering lower down the room. It was closer now, too close, a scuttling that sent ice through my veins. I stayed very still, waiting, pretending like I'd left. I held my breath, my body rigid, praying it would pass. It didn't. A shape crawled along the aisle. This time I saw them very clearly. It was a person, a thin, emaciated-looking person. dragging themselves commando style across the aisle. She was skeletal, her limbs sharp angles under filthy clothes, her movements jerky and unnatural. Oh, hell no. Hell to the no. I wasn't sticking around for this. I'm just going to back out real slowly. I called out into the darkness, but a voice spoke back. It was a girl's voice, fragile, in a language I didn't know. I have no idea what she said. It was in a language that I honestly couldn't really tell what it was, and it didn't sound threatening, though almost scared. Her fear mirrored mine, but it didn't make her less dangerous. I called out, asking if the person was okay, but no reply. I could hear them moving around, and it sounded like they were getting closer, and I didn't like that. She was coming for me. My plan was to leave and call the cops. I edged toward the exit, my heart hammering. But she was faster. That figure, the person fully leaped over the seats, hurtling forward over the next aisle. Two, leaping straight for me. She was a blur of motion, vaulting over chairs with impossible agility. They were yelling something I couldn't understand, but they didn't sound scared anymore. Her voice was sharp now, desperate, a cry that filled the auditorium. I kind of froze, not sure which direction to go. The exit was to my right, but she was closing the distance, her shadow looming in the half-light. In the half-darkness, this figure charging at me, leaping over chairs. I was not thinking straight. She was on me before I could move. When she was just an aisle away, I saw that she was some Caucasian girl, looked like a teenager. She had short, filthy blonde hair. Her face was dirty, and she had ketchup and mustard smeared around her mouth. Her eyes were wild, sunken, her cheeks streaked with grime and condiments. This young white lady had been crawling around, eating the vile leftovers off the theater floor. She was starving, a creature driven by hunger, scavenging in the dark. It's funny how your mint acts in a pinch, 'cause my immediate thought was pity for this hungry, emaciated teenager. Like I said, I grew up poor, and I sympathized. But pity didn't stop the fear. My moment of empathy caused me to freeze, and she leaped over the final aisle and was on top of me. She wasn't attacking. She was escaping. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. I think she just hadn't understood me and wanted to make sure that she could escape without me somehow restraining her. But her weight was real, her hands clawing at me as she pushed me back. She threw me back against the seat hard. I heard my spine even crack in a way that made me wince. The pain was sharp but fleeting, a warning shot from my body. She was sort of shaking me, spit flying onto my face. She's kind of yelling, sort of begging in whatever language she was talking now in. Her voice was a mix of panic and plea, her breath sour with the stench of scavenged food. I did the only thing I could think to do. I grabbed her head with both my hands and turned her face toward a whole pile of popcorn on the floor and just yelled, "Eat it!" I pointed to the popcorn, hoping she'd see I wasn't a threat, hoping that she'd get the point that I was just going to let her. And she did. She jumped off of me, went toward that popcorn, and just began pouring it into her own face. I let her live, but at what cost? This psycho had scared me, but I didn't have it in my heart to get some teenage runaway busted by the cops. She was a kid, lost, maybe running from something worse than hunger. Maybe this was a dumb idea. But you hear about young girls running away like this for a good reason and then end up being sent back to places that ruin them forever. I couldn't be the one to send her back. I let her eat for a minute and then just kind of poked her gently with my trash grabber claw. "Hey, you gotta go," I told her, gesturing at the exit door at the back which led outside. I pointed to the door, my voice soft but firm. "My boss is going to be here any minute. You gotta go," I said, gesturing again, hoping she understood enough English to at least comprehend what I was saying. I guess she did, because she takes one final scoop of popcorn and then just starts running towards the exit door. The theater was quiet again, but I wasn't. I realized how much damn danger I just put myself in and how potentially stupid I'd been in that moment. The adrenaline faded, leaving only fear and questions. I never told anyone about this incident, but I had nightmares about it for weeks. In my dreams, she wasn't a girl, she was something else. A creature with hollow eyes crawling through the aisles, hungering for more than popcorn, only in those nightmares. She wasn't some harmless girl from Eastern Europe or wherever she was from. She was a demon, crawling between the aisles, eating its way through the seats. The theater became a nightmare, its darkness a canvas for my fears. I saw her again, or thought I did. I'm pretty sure I even saw her again once. It was in the same theater, a fleeting glimpse during a busy night. She was there on, I guess, a date. The guy she was with, he didn't look like a good kind of person. He had a hardness to him, a cruelty in his eyes that made my skin crawl. Not at all. I guess you shouldn't just judge a book by its cover, but he gave me really bad vibes. Was he someone she'd met on the streets? A predator who'd found her? I wonder if it was someone that she met on the streets or someone she'd been sent back home to. The thought haunted me, a loose thread I couldn't pull. All I know is cleaning movie theaters at night can be a freaking terrifying thing. The mess was bad, but the shadows were worse. If that's as bad as it gets for you, then you're lucky. Because I learned that night that the real terror isn't the squished hot dog, it's what's hiding in the aisles, waiting for you to look away. Story number 5, The Heart Eater's Revenge. The auditorium's darkness was a shroud, hiding the betrayal about to unfold. My name's Claire, a college freshman who found solace in the AV Club's flickering projectors. I joined the AV Club, but that night, the screen didn't show a movie, it showed my shame, captured by someone I trusted. One of the many AV Club activities involved having an every other week movie night. The air buzzed with anticipation, but my stomach churned with a dread I couldn't name. I could feel a strange ringing in my ears. Something was coming, something that would strip me bare before my friends. The projector hummed, "A Traitor in the Shadows," John Weiss. And we've been friends since elementary school. He was my rock, my brother in all but blood, or so I thought. I loved John. His laughter lit up rooms, but tonight his eyes held a secret to me. He was like my brother from another mother. I was blind to the storm brewing in his heart. I had absolutely no idea, just no clue whatsoever, that he had feelings for me. The truth was a blade, and it was about to cut deep. The crowd settled, unaware of the violation to come. I was pretty sure that he was gay. My mistake was innocent, a misread of his quiet glances. The first movie that he had showed at AV Club was List Mania, paired with a grim classic, his humor always teetering on the edge. I joked with my friend Tommy about John's supposed crush, a playful deflection of my own feelings. It was one of those jokes where you say it because you have a crush on that person. Tommy's smile was my answer, and we fell hard. We got together. Love was a spotlight, but it cast long shadows. We soon became blah blah college hottest freshman couple. Tommy was my opposite, a jock with a nerd's heart, and we were reckless in our passion. We made love a lot. Our moments were private, or so I believed. He set up the projector and took the stage. John's voice was steady, but his choice was a trap. We were going to watch an indie horror movie that he'd been very lucky to acquire. The screen flickered, and my world began to crumble. The film was a violation, a wound made public. It began with shaky handycam footage of someone walking through the undergrowth. The breathing was heavy, predatory, a sound that clawed at my nerves. It said, "Heart Eater." The dorm on screen was Tommy's, a place I knew too well. The dorm building was familiar. My blood ran cold as the camera crept closer. There was a light snowfall on the ground, marking the moment in time, a February night I'd never forget. I felt a sinking feeling as that camera creep began to approach a certain ground floor window. The footage was a betrayal, raw and unyielding. What I didn't know was just how much had been captured on camera. The window framed our intimacy, a moment stolen by a hidden lens. We'd be all over each other without being 100% careful about our privacy. John had watched, recorded, and now displayed it. The filmmaker masked our identities by using some kind of film distortion technique. Our faces were warped, but our bodies were exposed. Everything was on display. The room, my shame, a public spectacle. I gripped Tommy's hand, his rage a mirror to my own. I could feel Tommy tensing, getting ready to leap up. But silence was our only shield. I pressed his thigh, and I shook my head. If we spoke, we'd reveal ourselves. Nobody else knew it was us. John's clever editing hid our identities, but not his intent. I'd started to suspect that the filmmaker, camera creep, was actually John. The truth was a poison, seeping into every friendship I'd built. I doubted any of them even knew which dorm building he stayed in. The film played on, each second a fresh wound. I knew how the scene ended. Tommy had sensed someone that day, rushing to the window. Tommy had been convinced that he heard someone outside the window. Now I saw it from John's eyes. The camera trembling as he fled. He began to run into the forest. The scene was chilling, a predator's retreat. He filmed from behind a tree as Tommy, digitally altered to look like some kind of inhuman glitch being pulled shut the curtains. The audience was hooked, oblivious to our pain. The final act was John's confession, veiled in art. Camera creep filmed himself in the mirror. It was John, of course. His mask hid his face, but I knew he wore one of those blank, faceless masks. In lipstick wrote on the mirror that his heart had been eaten. He removed a shirt to show an admittedly impressive fake wound. The symbolism was clear, his pain a twisted justification. He reached up and touched the mask and began to remove it. The screen cut to black, leaving us in silence. end credits comprising a handful of names that were completely fabricated. The applause was a knife, twisting in my gut. The AV Movie Club gave it a bunch of awkward applause. They saw art, we saw violation. Only myself, Tommy, and John, I prayed, knew the truth. We sat through the next film, a blur of violence that paled against our reality. We just sat there and watched Friday the 13th, Part 5. Our silence was a strategy, a refusal to give John the reaction he craved. We slipped away, quietly depriving John of the confrontation he'd likely been gearing up for. But we weren't done. Revenge was a slow burn, a fire we stoked in secret. We acted like we had no idea what he was talking about. John's probing questions met blank stares. Every time John brought up the footage or tried to gauge our reactions, we just sort of blinked, confused. His confidence crumbled, replaced by a nervous edge. We kept showing up to AV Club like nothing happened. Months passed, our act flawless. Nearly a year went by. We waited, biding our time until the moment was right. It was my turn to host a screening night. Our plan was subtle, a trap set with precision. I picked 2 long, slow burn films. The night would stretch late, perfect for our design. John walked home to his off-campus apartment. We had alibis, our paths diverging from his. Tommy and I lived in the opposite direction. John would be alone, vulnerable. We found a local message board and posted under a throwaway account. We painted him as a threat, vague but unmistakable. We described John in vague but recognizable detail. The campus would be our jury. The fallout was swift, a justice we didn't witness. Word spread fast. John was ambushed. His humiliation public. John had been followed, cornered, and humiliated, stripped, bound. His possessions scattered, no serious injuries, but enough to make a point. The police called it a mugging, but we knew better. John didn't offer much detail. He couldn't, not without exposing his own crime. We never talked about it again. Our silence was our victory, but it came at a cost. What John did to us was despicable. The aftermath was a reckoning, a mirror to our choices. Maybe we became something else in the process, villains or victims. The line blurred. There's still a part of me that thinks justice was done, but justice left scars. I left the AV Club, the campus, the memories on X. I found whispers of similar stories, creeps exposed, vigilantes rising. John vanished from my life, his fate a mystery. But his film haunts me, a reminder of trust broken and vengeance claimed. Some wounds don't heal, they just teach you to fight. Story number 6, The Rage in the Dark. The cinema was a sanctuary, a place where the world's weight lifted, if only for a couple of hours. Just a quick story for you here. The screen flickered, promising escape, but that night, it delivered something else entirely. I found you through a podcast and saw you took submissions on this YouTube, so I thought I'd shoot you a quick email. The memory was sharp, a jagged edge in my mind begging to be shared. A couple of years back, after the lockdowns here in the UK had lifted and everyone was desperate to get back to the movie theaters again, my family and I decided to go. The air was thick with anticipation, the city alive with people craving normalcy. So, the hubby and I decided that we'd let our kids pick the movie. The decision was a mistake. one we'd regret before the night was over, never again. Though they picked this crap called Shazam, Fury of the Gods, or something, which was a sequel to a movie that we hadn't seen in the Batman series or something like that. The theater was a cavern, its darkness a canvas for disappointment. However, they were absolutely adamant that it was the new Captain Marvel movie. My son, 8, and daughter, 6, were buzzing with excitement, their small hands clutching popcorn. Needless to say, it was not. The film was a mess, a jumble of noise and color that failed to hold even their attention. So they were restless and angry right from the get-go. The auditorium was a pressure cooker, tension simmering in the dark. At the time, my boy was 8 and my girl was 6. Their restlessness mirrored the crowd's, a shared frustration with the screen's chaos. I'm guessing my family weren't the only ones bored by the movie because close to the front, a group of teens were being fairly obnoxious, using their phones and just generally being a bit rowdy. Their laughter and glowing screens pierced the darkness, a rebellion against the film's failure. Normally, I'm the first to criticize their behavior, but this movie was so bad and so hard to follow that I'm not sure that I really could blame them too much. I leaned back, trying to focus, but the teens' voices were a constant hum. There was a woman up front closer to them who seemed to be there with a guy. The woman was a shadow, her presence charged with an unspoken intensity. I can't tell if he was her adult son or if she was just a cougar, but I think it was the latter. Her companion was a mystery, his role unclear in the dim light. Now, anyways, in fairness, the teens were close to her than they were to us. And maybe she was a really big fan of this Shazam character, and this was her most awaited film of the year. Her posture was rigid, her focus absolute. Now, I still think that she could have just tried asking those teens to pipe down and put their phones away. Though, a simple request could have diffused the tension. But she chose another path. Instead, and I kid you not, she jumped up from her seat, vaulted over into the next aisle, and then walked up behind the boys, screaming, "Shut up!" The theater erupted, her voice a thunderclap, and then proceeds to grab one of the teens' phones. The boy froze, his bravado crumbling. He swung around in his seat, and I guess something in the woman's eyes spooked him, because he began frantically apologizing. Her gaze was a weapon, sharp and unyielding. This teenage boy was terrified of this Karen. The room held its breath, the film forgotten. Honestly, I didn't blame him. She was pretty intimidating. Her presence was a storm, unpredictable and fierce. And Karen was having none of it. She flung the boy's phone down, and from the sound, she stamped on it. The crack echoed, a violent punctuation. One of his friends, a bigger kid, started squaring up to the Karen and began climbing over the seat. He was all bravado, his fist clenched, and that's when she reached into her handbag that she'd been carrying and pulled out what looked like a long wooden brush. The object was absurd, yet terrifying in her grip. And with this big swing, she clocked this kid straight in the jaw with a goddamn back scrubber or something. The impact was brutal, a shockwave through the auditorium. She hit him so hard that the stick literally broke and the brush head part went flying off into the dark auditorium. The chaos was instant, a wildfire spreading. At that point, chaos ensued. Screams filled the air, a cacophony of fear and outrage. Kids were wailing, adults were screaming, my children clung to me, their eyes wide with terror. The adult son, Karen's Buertork, was rushing over to try and de-escalate the situation. His efforts were futile. The woman, a force beyond reason. And I just simply grabbed my family, ushered them into the foyer, and told the cinema employees that a woman was going mad in there and had just assaulted a kid with a weapon. The foyer was a haven, its lights harsh but safe. There was no way that I was sticking around to witness what played out. We fled. The night swallowing our fear, we fled from the movie theater and drove home. The car was a cocoon, shielding us from the madness. And I saw in the local paper the next day that an altercation had occurred in that cinema, and I was never able to find any more about it. The news was vague, a whisper of the chaos we'd witnessed. I'm guessing she was rich and paid the kid off or something like that to keep it out of the court, or I don't know. The lack of answers was a weight, heavy and unresolved. But it was an absolutely terrifying thing to witness. The memory lingered, a dark mark on a simple outing. Horrible, yes. But on the plus side, at least we didn't have to sit through the rest of that movie. The irony was bitter, a small comfort in the face of terror. I scoured X for stories of cinema outbursts, finding tales of rage and violence in darkened theaters. Some spoke of similar incidents, of tempers flaring over trivial slights. The woman's face stayed with me, her rage a warning of how quickly civility could unravel. We returned to the cinema months later, but I was cautious, my eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of her. The rage in the dark had changed me, but with my family by my side, I was determined to reclaim our joy one movie at a time. Story number 7, The Vanishing Man in the Raincoat. The cinema smells of stale popcorn and damp carpet, a new thrill in our sleepy English town. I'm 7, clutching a soda and a bucket of popcorn, my eyes wide with the magic of the flickering screens. I lived in a small town in England, and we didn't have a cinema for quite a while. This place is a wonderland, but it's hiding something dark. So, when one opened, it was a novelty, and my mom would take me a lot tonight. The air feels heavy, like the building is watching me. The corridor to the bathrooms is a tunnel of shadows. Mom's chatting with a friend who works here, leaving me to fidget at the hallway's mouth. I needed to use the bathroom, but I had a drink and popcorn, and I didn't want to take them into the bathroom with me. I'm not going in alone. Mom was chatting to a friend who worked at the cinema. I was just hanging out at the start of the corridor leading to the bathrooms, waiting impatiently. The fluorescent lights buzz, casting a sickly glow on the tiled floor. He doesn't belong here. A man appears, awing and out of place. A huge, tall guy in a long waxed raincoat. His coat is dark green, heavy, the kind that creaks when he moves. Very dark green long raincoats made of thick canvas materials. He looked maybe in his 50s or older. His hair is greasy, hanging over his eyes, and his face is wrong, too still, too pulsed. This was a man. He's not here for a movie. He strides past me, his coat brushing the wall, and heads straight for the women's bathroom. Something's terribly wrong. He walks straight down the bathroom corridor and into the ladies' toilets. My stomach twists. I knew something felt very wrong about this, so I kept watching the door. He shouldn't be in there. I stare, unblinking, my popcorn forgotten. I told her what I'd seen, and she immediately went to get a cinema employee. Mom's back in seconds, her face tight, and she grabs a worker. Mom gets back with the female cinema employee who goes into the bathroom. He's gone. The employee emerges, her brow furrowed. There was no tall, hefty guy in a raincoat here. The bathroom is empty. No one. Not even a sound. In fact, there was nobody in the bathroom at all. How? She asked me if maybe I'd been mistaken and he'd gone into the men's. I shake my head. She knocked on the men's and then called in, and when there was no answer, opened the door, and the men's bathroom was empty. 2. I didn't blink. I assured her that it was totally, utterly impossible. And I meant it. He didn't leave. The movie starts. But I can't focus. I don't know for sure what happened that day. That man was real, but he vanished. What I do know is that I 100% definitely saw a large man go into the ladies' bathroom, and then the bathroom was empty the next time someone went into it. The corridor feels colder now, the shadows deeper. I am certain that he didn't leave through the door or realize that he'd gone into the wrong bathroom and switched to the men's. I saw him, and then he was gone. The worker shrugs it off, but Mom's eyes linger on the bathroom door. Years later, the cinema makes headlines. A couple of years later, the part of the ceiling of the cinema collapsed while people were in one of the screens watching a movie. No one was hurt, but the truth came out. It turned out there was a huge amount of space at the top of the building that spanned most of the area, and that it hadn't been constructed very well apparently, since it eventually collapsed. A crawl space, vast and hidden, stretching above the screens. I know I saw a large, creepy-looking guy go into that bathroom, and I know he then disappeared. Did he climb into the ceiling, or was he never human? My theory is that he somehow knew how to get into the crawl space through a ceiling vent and then went off and did something. But what? It's either that or my local cinema, which is still there to this day, albeit very much refurbished and higher quality with a fixed ceiling, is haunted by the ghost of a large man who hangs around the bathrooms. I don't want to believe it. Then, a decade later, I find it. A crumpled cinema ticket from the 1980s, tucked into an old book at a thrift shop. The name on it, Clara, age 9. She went missing from this cinema, last seen near the bathrooms. Clara's story never left me. The ticket feels like a message, a warning. Was he looking for her? The cinema's still open, glossier now. But I won't go back. What if he's still there, waiting in the crawl space? The man's face haunts me. Those empty eyes. That raincoat creaking in the silence. What did he want in that bathroom? I check the locks at home, keep the lights on. He's gone. But the cinema isn't empty. Something lingers in those corridors, and I'm not going back to find out what.